Hello, everyone. This week we're covering theories of crime. So, why do people commit crimes? Just a reminder, hopefully, you're following the notes on the Blackboard page. But before you review this, you should watch the pilot episode of Dexter and then complete your assignment, where you'll use one of the theories to describe what's going on with Dexter. Then you go to and post that to the discussion board, and you all can kind of share each other's theories, start to understand that way. This week, this lecture is really more of just a supplement, where I'm going to fill in some of the gaps that might not be covered by those discussing the theories. But the main crux of understanding this week will really be through your assignment and discussion. So again, if you haven't done that yet, close this video, go do that first, come back to this after you're done to make sure you filled in all the gaps. All right? Okay. So we're going to start by just talking very briefly about historical views of criminality. So most ancient explanations of crime, maybe not surprisingly, took on a religious tone. Crime was either equivalent to or due to sin. So the classical school of criminology emphasized free will to explain criminal conduct. Classical theorists also believed that punishment should fit the crime. The positivist school of criminology emphasized factors believed to determine criminal behavior. So really what the rest of the chapter and your assignment focus on, the sociological, the biological, psychological, environmental issues, and how those actually influence how and why people engage in these behaviors. So the positivist school used the scientific method and analysis of empirical data, and punishment should fit the criminal, not the crime, was the idea. So this sort of foreshadows modern ideas about rehabilitation of criminals rather than just punishment of them. So the modern theories of criminal behavior came out of this positivist school. And there are 4 categories of modern theories, as you saw from reading your text. And as you can see from your text as well, these kind of break down into other sub-theories as well. But so we have sociological, biological, psychological, and socio-psychological, sort of blending those two together. So we're going to start, again, just very briefly going over sociological explanations. The crux of this work is done in your assignment this week. So the idea here is that crime results from social or cultural forces. And there are structural theories that propose that dysfunctional social situations stop people from attaining legitimately what they want. So they result to crime to get what they want. And this is sometimes referred to as differential opportunity. Subcultural theories hold that crime occurs when groups of people endorse cultural values that clash with the dominant conventional rules of society. An example of the subcultural theory is the theory of focal concerns. So again, very brief overview. Next, we're going to touch on biological explanations. Here I'll give a little bit more detail just because I think for those who are not bio majors, not as familiar with evolutionary psych, this is the one that takes a little bit more to wrap your head around. So biological explanations stress genetic influences, neuropsychological abnormalities, and biochemical irregularities. So think about things like neurotransmitters, for those of you who have taken classes like abnormal psychology in the past. So oftentimes the research here will focus on twin studies and adoption studies, and these really are the 2 main ways that we look at biological and genetic influences in general, not just in this subfield. In twin studies, the researcher wants to look at the concordance rate between the twins. So the concordance rate is the percentage of pairs of twins who both have the behaviors. So if one engages in a criminal act, the other twin also engages in the criminal act. And you look at this for two types of twins, monozygotic or identical twins. If you're not familiar with twin biology, monozygotic twins come from one egg, one zygote, that splits early on in development. And so they are pretty much genetically identical. And then there are dizygotic twins or fraternal twins. Fraternal twins come from two fertilized eggs. So they actually are no more similar genetically than any other pair of siblings. However, they have shared the same womb and then the same environment as well. So it's really interesting to compare these people who are genetically identical to these people who are, again, no more similar than siblings. So results have suggested that inherited tendencies do predispose people to commit crimes, or at least they may. The influence of heredity appears to be higher for aggressive types of antisocial behaviors. These include things like assaults, robberies, sexual offenses, murder. Then for non-aggressive crimes, things like using substances, shoplifting, truancy. So what's inherited? What is the genetic cause of crime? We don't have one good answer for that. And this is not unusual for psychological issues. We don't have one good gene for any psychological issue now. Couple reasons. One is that there are probably more than one gene, to be perfectly honest, for these complex behaviors. And the other is this subfield of psychology is fairly new. This idea of combining biology and psychology to look at the genetic components of behavior is fairly new. So we don't have all the answers yet. So what is inherited? They think that there may be low MAOA in combination with the history of maltreatment. There might be some neuropsychological abnormalities, some actual brain abnormalities, abnormal patterns in an EEG, which is like an EKG, but for your brain. It takes brain waves. Impaired functioning in what's called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is right behind your forehead, and it is the part of our brain that really determines personality. It's engaged in inhibition. Some people say it's the part of our brain that makes us the most human. So it would make sense that people who are impulsive, commit crimes, don't sort of fit with the personality we expect from people in society, might be more likely here to have these neuropsychological abnormalities in the prefrontal cortex. There might be differences in the autonomic nervous system, so things beyond our control, our conscious control. Physiological differences, one of the examples is low serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter known to be associated with a variety of psychological disorders, including depression, anxiety, all manner of things. And then there also are personality and temperament differences, and those are going to go more into our next theory of crime, which are the psychological theories. So these theories emphasize individual differences in the way people think or feel about their behavior. These differences might make some people more prone to criminal conduct by increasing their anger, weakening their attachments to other people, so they don't feel as guilty, for example, or fueling their desire to take risks and seek thrills. So psychoanalytic theories of crime say that crime results from a weak ego and superego that can't restrain the id. If you know Freud's theories, this will sound familiar to you. If you're not familiar, the id is this animalistic part of ourselves that just wants to do whatever it wants, and the ego and the superego usually keep it in check. Criminal behavior is a means of obtaining substitute gratification of basic needs like love, nurturance, and attention that may not be satisfied in this person by, say, their family. Psychoanalytic theories have sort of fallen out of favor in modern criminology. Criminal thinking patterns. Here it has been proposed that criminals engage in fundamentally different way of thinking than non-criminals, that their thinking is erroneous and irresponsible. Personality-based explanations of criminality is really where more modern theories fall, to be perfectly honest. And they're going to focus on different traits, personality traits that might be related to criminality. So extroversion, we typically think of as just being outgoing, but other parts of extroversion include being active, aggressive, and impulsive. Neuroticism is an old word essentially for being anxious, on edge, and that restlessness, the emotional volatility, being hypersensitive can be seen in criminals. And then there's psychoticism. Again, we tend to think of this as people who hear voices or see things that are not there, but there are other elements that are related, like being troublesome, lacking in empathy, being insensitive to others, sometimes to the point of cruelty. There is research supporting a link between, or a positive association between, high levels of extroversion and increased offending. However, there's less clear research about neuroticism and psychoticism. The trait that's focused on the most, however, is what's called psychopathy. So psychopathy, yes, same root as psychopath, right? These people are deceitful, manipulative individuals who engage in repetitive criminal activity for which they feel they have little or no remorse. Diagnostically, we call this something you may be more familiar with, antisocial personality disorder. People with antisocial personality disorder are often described as sociopaths or psychopaths. People argue that those are different things. I'll just tell you that diagnostically within psychology, those are both the same thing. Psychopaths, sociopaths, both would be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. People with this disorder persistently disregard and violate the rights of others. This starts at least age 15, and the DSM, which is our Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, that's what we use to diagnose folks, requires that you have to be at least 18 years of age to receive this diagnosis. But oftentimes we see this start much, much younger. So people with these symptoms fail to conform to social norms. They will just do things that are grounds for arrest and not really care if they get arrested. They will be deceitful. They are impulsive. They fail to plan ahead. They are irritable and aggressive. This can be physical as well. They have a reckless disregard for their own safety, but also the safety of those around them. They don't care if they get hurt or if they hurt anybody around them. They are consistently irresponsible. They fail to sustain consistent work, honor financial obligations. This could even be family obligations as well. Just disappear on their family. And really a hallmark of this disorder, I would say, is this lack of remorse. They just don't care who they hurt. It doesn't even sort of register with them. So a couple quick things before I get to what's on this slide about this particular disorder. So these people just disregard and violate the rights of others. They're very sharp and quick and with it. This is sometimes referred to as the mask of sanity. They put on a good front. They're often good schmoozers, very smarmy. People like them, but it's always sort of the superficial relationship. They have an inadequate conscience. Again, they just don't care what happens to other people. They're, as a result, emotionally unaffected by punishments. This has often been determined or called a sincere deceitfulness. They seem really sincere. Well, they're lying to you. They are sensation-seeking, stuff that the average person would find gratifying. They just don't. So they look for the next and the next and the next thing to be gratified, realities for their gratification. They reject authority and they're unable to profit from experience. They have this erratic social history. It's sometimes called historical stupidity. And they have a really hard time maintaining interpersonal relationships, not surprisingly, right? Because they're remorseless, they're challenged interpersonally, they don't understand why people are feeling the way they feel. They lie, they're reckless, they're sexually promiscuous, they're impulsive, they just have this disregard from others. One thing I'll note is that people are described as having this disorder rather than suffering from it. And although we tend to think of this as sort of stereotypical criminals, those who end up in jail, there are sort of good, if we want to call them that, people with antisocial personality disorder, and they don't get caught, right? Some of them are in jobs where those behaviors are good. Something to think about. So what is on this screen is the alternate criteria for antisocial personality disorder. So brief history of politics within psychology. The current edition of the DSM is the DSM-5. And before it came out, a lot of research went into coming up with new criteria for the personality disorders because the old criteria just really were not working. And a group really did a lot of work on this. They presented it to the people who publish it in November of 2012. The DSM was published in May of 2013. The folks who published the DSM said, you're too late. We're going to copy paste the old personality disorders, and then I guess we'll throw what you came up with into the appendix. So there are actually two different sets of criteria for antisocial personality disorder in the current DSM. I know. Crazy, weird, politics seeps in everywhere in all kinds of different ways. But what's on your screen is the alternate criteria for the antisocial personality disorder in the DSM-5. So you have to have moderate or greater impairment in 2 or more of these personality traits. So identity, self-direction, empathy, and intimacy. And again, probably none of these are really surprising us, right? There's a new specifier you can use with or without psychopathic features. In this case, they're specifying psychopathic features as low anxiousness and withdrawal and high attention seeking. And then you have to have 6 or more of the traits listed here. So manipulativeness, use of cunning, craft, or subterfuge to influence or control others, casual use of others to one's own advantage, using seduction, charm, glibness, or ingratiation to achieve one's own end, callousness, lack of empathy or concern for others' feelings or problems, lack of guilt or remorse about the negative or harmful effects of one's actions on others, deceitfulness, dishonesty, untruthfulness, embellishment, or fabrication when relating events, misrepresentation of self, hostility, irritability, hot-temperedness, being unfriendly, rude, surly, or nasty, responding angrily to minor slights or insults, risk-taking, sometimes referred to as recklessness, craving and pursuit of stimulation and variety without regard for consequences, boredom proneness and unplanned initiation of activities to counter that boredom, unnecessary risk-taking, lack of concern for one's limitations, denial of the reality of personal danger, high tolerance for uncertainty and unfamiliarity, impulsivity, just what it sounds like, acting on the spur of the moment in response to immediate stimuli, acting on a momentary basis without plan or consideration of outcomes, difficulty establishing and following plans, failure to learn from your experience, and then finally, irresponsibility, disregard for or failure to honor financial and other obligations or commitments, lack of respect and follow through on agreements and promises, unreliability, failure to keep appointments or to complete tasks or assignments, carelessness with own and or others' possessions. So with antisocial personality disorder, how do we figure out if someone has it? Well, one of the ways we do this is we try to assess it. In psychology, we always want to do something to actually assess whether someone has something or not. So there are different ways to check it. So there's the Hare psychopathy checklist and the PCLR, which is the psychopathy checklist revised. And these are established to measure psychopathy as a risk factor for offending. And on the links for this module, you'll see a link to Hare's website where he talks about this measure. So what causes this psychopathic behavior? Well, perhaps there's a left hemisphere deficiency that impairs executive functioning, might be one of the theories. Executive functioning is our ability to plan and regulate behavior. Simplest way to think about it is you're getting dressed in the morning. Executive functioning lets you know you got to put on your socks before your shoes. Okay. And then stimulation seeking theory claims that the thrill of seeking and disruptive behavior of the psychopath increases sensory input and arousal to a more tolerable level for these people, and can be related to dysfunctional families. And I mentioned this before, but again, psychopaths, sociopaths, no diagnostic difference. The difference just in vocabulary here, psychopaths are said to be born with these tendencies. Sociopaths are said to develop them perhaps after a trauma or something else that had happened to them. All right, then we have these social psychological theories of crime. There's control theory, which assumes that people will behave antisocially unless they learn not to do so, which is a really interesting way of thinking about things. And then there's containment theory, which it is the idea that it's largely external containment or social pressure and institutionalized rules that controls crime. So if we don't have that, or if it's not resonating with us for some reason, that's where you see crimes. So it says heredity predisposes an individual to commit crime, and then socialization practices then translate these innate tendencies into criminal acts. So this is sort of a weird way of thinking about it. Not what makes some people criminal, but that like we all might be born with this tendency. Kind of interesting to think about. Learning theory, very basic idea about learning theory is that our behavior is learned due to the consequences in the environment. Okay, very basic definition. Couple sub-ideas here. Differential association approach says that the potential criminal develops definitions of behavior that make deviant conduct seem acceptable. Then we have differential association reinforcement theory. Criminal behavior is acquired through modeling and reinforcement. So we see other people do it. We ourselves are somehow reinforced for engaging in criminal behavior. Social learning theory basically says that we learn by watching other people and whether they're rewarded or punished for behaviors. And it acknowledges the importance of differential reinforcement for developing new behaviors, but it says there's more importance in vicarious learning, watching what other people do and seeing whether or not they get punished. So social learning theory depends on paying attention to the person that is being rewarded or punishment, retention in memory of that. Oh, this person did this and they got rewarded, or they got punished, or they didn't get punished, perhaps, right? Reproduction of those observed behaviors. I'm going to do those same behaviors because that person got rewarded or didn't get punished. And then reinforcement of those behaviors. So when you do them, either you're not punished or maybe even you're rewarded by praise from your fellow people. These might be influenced by your family. Maybe you were abused as a child. Maybe your parents were criminals themselves. So subcultural influences. So within certain subcultures, there might be more of a tendency to accept crime, right? And then symbolic models are things that we see on TV, in movies, in video games. So no, these are not the only reason why someone might act that way, but it can normalize this behavior for some people who are unable to think critically about the media they see. Multiple component learning theory talks about that whether a crime is committed depends in part on the ratio of gains and losses for criminal and non-criminal behavior. Is it a good thing to be criminal? Is it a bad thing? So individual differences influence these ratios and determine whether or not an individual is actually likely to commit a crime. And then social labeling theory says that deviance is created by the labels that society assigns to certain acts, right? So society says this is a crime. And it distinguishes between primary deviance, or the criminal's actual behavior, and secondary deviance, or society's reaction to the offensive conduct. So the stigma of being labeled a criminal under this theory says this can be sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So in terms of integrating all of these theories of crime, really, to be perfectly honest, none of these explain crime perfectly. You need all of these to kind of interact. And there are 4 contributions to crime that occur in a developmental sequence. So antecedent conditions, or genetics, okay? Those happen before you're even born. Then early indicators like childhood aggression, child abuse, being abused as a child. Developmental processes, maybe being pressured by your peers, right? Girls pressuring each other to shoplift makeup. Boys in some subcultures pressuring each other to join a gang, for example. And then maintenance factors, being in an environment where people say this is okay, or maybe there's lots of opportunities to engage in an offense. I'm going to talk very briefly here about school violence, because this is something that I think is really troublesome to a lot of us in today's society. So from 1999 to 2000, 71% of students in public schools reporting experiencing one or more violent incidents. And 20% reported serious violent incidents, which included rape, sexual battery other than rape, physical fight with a weapon, or robbery with or without a weapon. 17% of high school students reported they carried some sort of weapon, a gun, a knife, a club, at least once in the previous month, and 6% said they carried it to school. Smaller percentage of this happened in primary schools, about 67%, then middle schools, 94%, or high schools, 95%. This is between 2005 and 2006, and that was just for any violent incident. Common characteristics that are identified in those who commit these school ground killings, in particular, we think about school shootings. Usually they have experience with firearms, a fascination with guns, and isolation, rejection, or torment by classmates. They're preoccupied with graphically violent media. They suffered teasing, maybe because of their physical appearance. They have a history of angry brooding over their real or perceived status as social outcasts. And they developed a detailed plan for their aggression, which was often communicated to others in the days or weeks prior to the event. So they do plan. So what are proposed reforms to try to prevent some of this? Some people say uniforms, then you can't have gang colors. In my opinion, that's not going to solve everything, right? Beefing up security. We've seen a lot of schools do this, install metal detectors and the like. Passing tougher gun laws, making it harder for minors to access them. Offering violence prevention programs, and restricting access to violent media. Although we know once we restrict something, the kids are going to try even harder to get to it, right? So another suggested thing has been profiling to predict which students are more likely to commit crimes. As you can imagine, this results in students being unjustly targeted. And increasing communication between students and school administrators. So zero tolerance policies are ineffective and have the potential to stigmatize and harm a variety of mistakenly identified individuals. Threat assessment, on the other side, holds more promise, and it involves carefully considering the nature of the threat, the risk posed by that particular individual, and the needed response to reduce the risk of harmful action. So just to kind of leave you on something to think about here, think about the school shootings that have happened. What is the school's responsibility for it? What is the responsibility of any psychologists involved? We don't have clear answers legally on these yet, but it's certainly something that we have to consider. If a threat is known, what can we do about it?